Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be looking at media ownership. Who owns the news? Well, I guess nobody really owns the news, but they do own the organisations which present them. In this case, of course, the newspapers. Now, when we're learning about newspapers, it's really important to know who actually owns them, because there are some really big issues that are raised by the ownership of newspapers, how they select their content, what news values they adhere to, and how impartial they are. So how biased or unbiased they might be. Now, you've got to remember that the British newspapers, they're privately owned, they're businesses. So they have freedom of speech. They're allowed to report on issues and events in a biased way. The creations, the stories that the newspapers create about what's going on in the world, these are very much mediated representations of reality. They're not like sort of natural, this is what actually happened. This is a selection, an aspect of what happened. So newspapers always select the story that they want to run. Now, when you select something, like I said in a previous lesson, if you've got 100 pictures and you can only use one, then you're going to have to reject 99 of them. So it's about selection and it's about rejection, choosing what goes in and what doesn't. So here's a little model of the way that this process works. So first of all, we've got what really happened. So the actual event that actually happened on the street. Now, this is then newspapers select and construct a version of events. So they write the story, and this mediated version of reality is presented to us, the audience. Okay, so we get their story. This is what they say happens. Which may not be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, let's have a look at the type of influences that newspapers have. Now, their sales have been going down, and for example, the Times made about £3.5 million profit last year. The Sun, because it had to pay out a lot of compensation for the phone hacking scandal, it lost something like £65 million. So, that £3.5 million profit sounds a lot, but actually, when you think about the size of the business and how much work has to be done, I don't think that that's a huge amount of profit. When you consider that one of our owners that we're going to be looking at today, Rupert Murdock, he's worth about £20 billion. It's sort of chicken feed really, but it's not about the money, it's about the influence that they can have. So politics, culture, social values, and there's this key term I'd like you to be familiar with, agenda setting. So when a newspaper sets the agenda, what they're doing is they're raising issues, they're kind of creating a set of ideas that British people are going to be interested in at any given time. So they very often conduct campaigns, social political issues, often with the aim of getting laws changed, and a lot of them have done that quite successfully. They don't have to be impartial, so they're going to report on stories like, there might be a speech by a politician, they might report on how certain groups of people in society have responded to that speech. The outcome of a court case, there's lots of different ways that they can bias these stories. And very often they reinforce our values about what's right or what's wrong. And sometimes they might even undermine these beliefs. Now let's have a look at an example here of some front page stories that newspapers have carried. Migrants spark housing crisis. Now EU tells Britain to build more homes as open borders send population soaring. Okay, so, there is a housing crisis in this country. But whether that's actually sparked by European Union migrants coming into the country or patterns of home ownership is very much a debate. This is very much presenting the idea that it's because people are coming into our country that there aren't enough houses to go around. Got another one here. EU plot to scrap Britain. Oh, crikey. So they want to wipe us off the map. I mean, this is, really presenting a conflict here between, Britain's proud identity and European influence, and they express there. Here's another one from the Sun. Ramadan train driver in crash. They had to print a retraction and an apology here because this very much gives the impression that the reason that this train crashed was because the train driver was fasting. And that there's absolutely no evidence to support that in this case at all. He was fasting, there was a crash, but whether that was a cause or not doesn't... There isn't any evidence to connect those two things. It says down here that he went through 2 red lights, but actually both those red lights were on the same signal. So that's another correction that they had to repeat. So you can see that by selecting news and by reporting it on it in a particular way, they can very much shape people's opinions about things like, for example, migration, about the European Union, and about Islam, in these 3 examples. So the person who owns one of the CSPs that we're looking at today is this chap here. His name is Rupert Murdock. And you can see here he's reading a copy of The Times, one of the newspapers that he and his business own. He also owns, his business, News UK, also owns The Sun. Now, this is important. I mean, this is an Australian businessman, Rupert Murdock. He lives in the United States of America, and he has a massive influence over the way that people think about key issues here in the UK. He owns an organisation called News Corporation. Now, this is a multinational. It works in many countries at the same time. But the British arm of it is called News UK. Now, News UK is one of the companies that News Corp owns. News UK is a media conglomerate because that's made up of lots of other little companies. So, for example, The Sun and The Times in the UK. When we look at the multinational ideas, there's things like sort of Fox News, Fox Searchlight. Fox News has been very controversial in the way that it's reported under Donald Trump's presidency because it's very widely regarded as being very biased. But then, of course, as far as Trump supporters are concerned, the rest of the news is very biased. It depends who you believe. So there are a huge amount. We have a look on the next slide at some of the other businesses that Mr. Murdock controls. Now, The Times is the biggest selling quality newspaper, the biggest selling UK broadsheet at the time of writing this, and The Sun is the biggest selling UK tabloid. So you can see that between the 2 of these newspapers, we've got an awful lot of people who are being reached. Now, including the Sunday editions, the Sunday Times and The Sun on Sunday, they account for about a third of the newspapers that are sold on the planet. And they reach about 1.5 million readers. Now, this is an example of what's called horizontal integration. You should be, there are different ways that businesses are organised. So News Corporation, for example, and the reason why they do this is by having a range of different titles and exploiting different platforms. It reaches an audience of more than those 1.5 million that just the newspapers themselves reach. So we've got News UK, which is the British arm of News Corporation, and that owns several different businesses. Now, the first of these businesses we're going to look at is The Times. Now, The Times, as you know, it targets this very ABC1, middle, upper class, probably even more AB readers, people in the highest socio-economic bracket. Now, at the same time, we've got The Sun, which targets the C2DE. So we've got the middle class and the working class being informed by these newspapers, which are owned by Rupert Murdock, and put a particular agenda and a particular worldview across of what the world is actually like. Now, as well as these newspapers, there are other ways that they reach their audiences that in many ways have many more hits. So, for example, the times.co.uk. Now, you have to subscribe to that to actually read the articles. But the sun.co.uk, that's not a subscription service. Anyone can access that at any time. And they also put out a lot of, both of these actually put out a lot of information on social media so that they can reach people that way as well. Now, in the last couple of months, the Times has actually opened a radio station as well. Times Radio, which is available on the digital broadcast, And that's another way that Rupert Murdock gets the kind of editorial decisions and his beliefs and values out to the people who read his newspapers. Okay, so these are some of the other organisations. You can see HarperCollins here, that's a book publisher. Here we've got the Times up here and the Sun, so this isn't a great resolution. We've got Sky, of course, which he owned up until recently. Be careful, because the Sunday Mail and I think there's one called the Sunday Telegraph here. That's the Australian versions. But Fox Studios, 20th Century Fox, Fox Business, News.com Australia. So, you know, across the English-speaking world, really, News Corporation have a real stranglehold on the amount of control they have over the way that information is communicated to people. Okay, so that's the Times. Let's have a look then at the Daily Mirror. Now, the Daily Mirror, here's a typical story here. It's about homeless people forced onto the streets. The mum whose unborn baby died of the cold, the hard-working builder who broke his back and lost his job, the wife evicted on her birthday, dispatches from 24 hours on the homeless front line, which will horrify the nation. So a real public interest story there, very much about sort of, the underclass, the poor people, who the left-wing readers of the Daily Mirror will be more sympathetic towards. The Daily Mirror was owned by Trinity Mirror until 2018. That was basically the company that owned the Mirror. But then they started being quite aggressive in their takeovers. They bought another newspaper group called Northern and Shell. That cost them £200 million. And this is an example of a takeover. And it's another example of the concentration of media ownership, in the same way that News Corp owns the Times and the Sun and all of those other right-wing. Here we've got some left-wing ownership. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, because they formed a new group. And this group is called Reach. All right, so it's not Trinity Mirror anymore, it's Reach. And they own the following newspapers in addition to the Daily Mirror. We've got the Sunday Mirror, which is just the Sunday version, the Sunday People, and the Daily Express. Now, the Daily Express is quite a right-wing newspaper, so it's interesting that they'd own these, which actually appeal. They're both tabloids. The Daily Express is a bit more mid-market, so it's aimed maybe at C1, C2D. But again, by horizontally integrating their titles, they're able to reach a great many more people than they would if they just had the one, if they just published the Daily Mirror, for example. You know, you've got to remember that this is a business, and they make their money by people buying their newspapers. We've got the Daily Star, which is full of gossip, hardly a newspaper at all, so a lot of people might argue, and the Daily Star on Sunday as well. Now, whereas News International had about 30%, these guys, or a third, Reach have got about 20% of the share of newspaper circulation. So between the two companies, that's half of the newspapers in the country are circulated by and owned by these two groups. Now, Reach has got a lot of impact in the local news as well. So the Daily Record and the Sunday Mail, which are Scottish newspapers, they also own 240 regionals, the Manchester Evening News, the Bristol Post. You know, so they've got other ways of getting their views across. They say, we are the largest national and regional newspaper publisher in the UK. In 2016, we sold over 240 million national and regional newspapers. Impressive. Now, this is from their website. There's a lot of information here. If you want to have a look on their website, then please do so. I'd just like to draw your attention to two main areas. Now, the first one is here. The total UK reach for our national and regional news brands per month, that's 46.7 million. All right, that's how many people. That's a fair bit more than half of the population of the United Kingdom. So over here as well, our traditional print newspapers and magazines are a mix of national and regional paid for and free publications. One of the publications that they have is Metro, which is free, left on London Transport. So if you've ever seen one of those free newspapers on the train or the bus in London, then they actually distribute and publish those as well. Success is driven by the resilience of our circulation, scale of our portfolio, and through attracting advertising. Reach Printing Services operates 6 print sites, so they actually have the technology to print your stuff as well if you want them to print stuff for you. 24 full-colour presses providing internal print services to our titles, as well as print solutions externally to third parties. So they print your newspaper for you if you want to pay them. How this makes money? We principally make money from paid-for publication circulation, so basically people buying the newspapers, advertising, contract printing, and events. Print revenues and efficiency are enhanced by selling print solutions, and 14.6 million people read one of their newspapers every month. Okay, so you can see it's quite a big business. These are the people who they work for, the stakeholders. These are the people who make money out of the company because they are, as you all remember, a private enterprise. Now, does this matter? So we've got all of these companies which are these 2 big companies which own all these newspapers. Well, there are 2 sides to the argument. Now, if you ask the group themselves, people that support this ownership model, then what they're able to do as a result is that they're able to run more efficiently. It's a thing called efficiency of scale. The bigger and the more things that you have that you can produce, the cheaper you can do it, basically. So that allows them to generate higher profits and be a more successful business. And also they can achieve greater control in their markets. If you own lots of newspapers, then you can control large chunks of the newspaper rather than having to engage in too much competition with others. Now, there are declining print sales. People aren't buying newspapers because people want their information for free. So owners argue that newspaper brands can only be saved through mergers, so companies combining together, takeovers and online development. They'd never be able to distribute all of those free copies of the Metro on the trains and the buses in London if it weren't for the profits that are generated by all of those local newspapers and big selling titles like the Express and the Mirror. Okay, so that's the pro, and the con side. They say that this concentration of ownership destroys competition, limits the diversity of views and opinion, and places a massive political and economic power in the hands of a small number of incredibly wealthy individuals and organisations like Reach and News Corp. So, what I'd like you to do, please, is I'd like you to create an infographic summarising this information. I'll show you an example of an infographic in a minute, but this is the information that's got to be on it. Now, your audience is Year 9 students, so they're an audience that you should be fairly familiar with, having been one up until about 6 months ago, explaining the following. Now, remember, these guys haven't done GCSE Media Studies, so you need to keep it really, really simple for them. What are your 2 CSPs? What is their circulation readership? Who reads them? Who owns them? What platforms do they exist on? What forms do they take? And how are they adapting to changes in technology and reader expectations? That's the information that I'd like you to include. I've forgotten to finish that sentence. If there's anything else you can add to that, you can do your own research on the internet, okay? If you're watching this presentation, I presume you've got internet access. So get out there, get on the internet, find out some more, have a poke around their website, use the Wikipedia page as a starting point if you wish. Okay, so here we go. This is an example of an infographic here. This is an infographic about infographics. It's all about visual aids and organisation of information. So it's a really key thing to tie into media studies. Now try and be creative. Try and make it look good as well as be informative. You can use things like screen grabs. You can print the screen if there's a particular website that you want to reference, or you want to take their masthead and put that at the top of a column. Use images, try and find pictures. Pictures tell 1,000 words, remember. There's loads of statistics on here. Diagrams, charts, tables. 40% of people, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's this row here. These 40%, they respond better to visual information than text. Good. Well, that's your task for today. So summarise the information in the lesson that you've had today and some of the information from previous lessons. And good luck. As usual, any questions, please drop them on the stream. Thank you very much.